The tank engines growled like beasts in the distance, a rolling thunder that shook the earth beneath frightened villagers and retreating soldiers alike. Smoke clawed at the horizon, and every road seemed to fill with the glinting armor of steel monsters advancing without mercy. For the men and women pinned down in the mud, it felt like the end. And then, through the haze of chaos, a single silhouette appeared in the sky. An A-10 Warthog, flown by a woman who had once sworn she'd never let fear decide her fate. She banked low and her cannons began to sing. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Her name was Captain Elise Moran. To the world, she was just another pilot, but to those who had served with her, she was the one who always carried a quiet fire. She had seen too much loss in the past months, friends buried under rubble, convoys torn apart, promises broken in the roar of artillery. And now, as she gripped the stick of her A-10, she felt that weight pressing against her chest like armor of its own. On the ground below, retreating infantry scrambled for cover. Dust hung in the air, coating their lungs, making every breath burn. Some whispered prayers. Others shouted orders drowned out by the advancing tanks. The steel column moved like an unstoppable tide, its treads grinding through roads, its guns already trained on the broken remnants of a town that had once been filled with laughter. Elise saw it all from above, the scattering, the terror, the hopelessness. For a moment, doubt flickered across her mind. Could one aircraft really stand between annihilation and survival? The odds were absurd. And yet something inside her refused to let the ground below collapse into silence without a fight. She leveled her gaze, thumb hovering over the trigger, her heartbeat drumming louder than the engines themselves. She thought of her brother, a soldier who had once written her from the front, "If you ever hear tanks, just know they're not invincible. Someone, somewhere, will find a way to stop them." He hadn't survived to see this day, but Elise, staring down at the armored serpent crawling forward, whispered into her helmet mic, "This is for you." The first roar of her GAU-8 Avenger cannon cracked open the sky. A stream of depleted uranium shells ripped downward, stitching fire and steel across the lead tank. The monster buckled, sparks bursting from its seams, and then the impossible happened. It stopped. Behind it, the column hesitated. The whole advance shuddered like a chain pulled too tight. Men on the ground stared upward in disbelief, eyes wide, as if the very sky had bent to shield them. Chaos deepened. The tanks scrambled to reorganize, their turrets swiveling like panicked heads. Soldiers ducked behind whatever rubble they could find, and the cries of hope mingled with cries of fear. Elise banked again, feeling the pull of gravity grip her stomach, but her hands were steady. The villagers below, who had moments ago believed they would die nameless in the shadow of machines, now pointed to the sky. "The Hog," someone gasped. "She's flying the Hog." Every pass was a gamble. Every dive exposed her to anti-air fire streaking upward in desperate defiance. Tracers laced the air like burning threads, and yet Elise pushed deeper each time. Sweat beaded beneath her helmet, her breath sharp, controlled, but heavy. She knew she could be hit. She knew her bird might not climb again. But when she saw the children huddling in cellars, when she heard the broken sobs over the comms of soldiers who thought they'd been abandoned, she pressed harder. The battlefield became a storm of smoke and flame. The tanks fired wildly, shells exploding in clouds that shook shattered buildings. Elise's world narrowed to the rhythm of her gun. One tank after another fell silent, their hulks burning against the horizon. Each strike was more than destruction. It was survival, a heartbeat stolen back from despair. Yet inside her, the weight grew heavier. For every tank she destroyed, she imagined the men inside, some pressed into service, some just as young as the soldiers she sought to protect. She could almost see their faces in the smoke. The moral line blurred. Was she saving lives, or was she just reshaping loss into a different form? Her hands trembled once, but then she remembered the families hiding in the rubble, the children who still had futures worth fighting for. Her resolve returned like iron hammered in fire. On the ground, a soldier named Carter lifted his gaze as another tank erupted in flame. His throat ached from shouting orders, from telling his men to hold when everything screamed at them to run. But when he saw the Warthog swoop low again, he found his voice steady. "She's buying us time," he yelled. "She's holding them. Get ready to move!" Hope, something that had been crushed beneath steel for weeks, began to spread among the survivors like wildfire. Murmurs turned to shouts, then to defiance. The tide was turning. What had begun as a slaughter was becoming resistance. Elise's fuel gauge dipped lower. Ammunition was running out. And still, tanks crawled forward, fewer now, but determined. Her plane groaned with each maneuver, metal straining against physics, and every nerve in her body begged her to pull back. But retreat meant surrender, and surrender was not an option. She whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for those below. Then she angled into the steepest dive yet. The cannon roared, fire lancing downward, and the last of the column faltered. One by one, their engines sputtered into silence, their crews abandoning the machines that had once seemed invincible. The battlefield stilled. The silence that followed was not empty, it was sacred, filled with the breath of the living who had expected to die. Elise pulled her hog into the sky once more, her body shaking, her vision blurred by exhaustion. The voice of Carter cracked through the comms. "Whoever you are up there, you saved us." She smiled faintly, though no one could see. She didn't need recognition. She only needed to know that the ground beneath her was still alive. When she finally landed hours later, her plane scarred and smoking, Elise stepped down to silence. Then, slowly, soldiers began to gather. They didn't cheer. They didn't shout. Instead, they stood in quiet reverence, eyes filled with something she hadn't seen in months: hope. One by one, they raised their hands, saluting not just a pilot but the belief that even in chaos, courage can rise because kindness doesn't vanish, it waits, and it finds its way back. The tanks had stalled, their steel advance broken, and in the quiet that followed, Elise realized something timeless. Even the smallest act of courage can rewrite the fate of many. And as the villagers emerged from the rubble, sunlight touching their faces for the first time in days, the sky above no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a promise. If you felt this story in your heart, make sure to subscribe and share it with someone who believes in hope against all odds. And tell me in the comments what courage means to you. I'd love to know your thoughts.